Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dancing Philosopher's page. I'm here to review this very exciting book, Resurrecting Socrates, The Case for the Thinking Citizen. Now, don't be worried, this isn't actually a biography of the ancient philosopher Socrates. There's tons of literature on that. This is a story about a group of philosophy students at Bristol during the Brexit referendum about 10 years ago or so. And it is aimed at getting you to be an independent thinker in the mass information age. Now, I'm a philosopher, which is why I've been asked to review this book. That's why it's got this sort of band here, but it's actually on sale now on Amazon for about £10, 13 euros. It's about the size of, a little smaller than A4 on paperback, pretty thin though, only about 90 or so pages, pretty small print. Most importantly, very accessible. So it's written, even though it's written by a philosopher, it's written for everybody. But the reason why I'm going to be doing it is to sort of perhaps understand a little bit more about this person's world or this team's world, this group of students. And so hopefully I can offer some insights on that. So I'm not actually going to sell you the book. That actually goes against what they were trying to do. I'm just here to describe the book, describe the story, what they went through, and some of the stuff that they were dealing with, and then see if you want, it's up to you whether you want to get it. But the link will be below this page. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to start with chapter one. Chapter one is actually the story. Even though the rest of the book is infused with the story, it gets a little bit more into the arguments and contentions that he's trying to deal with. That they are trying to deal with. But chapter one is about the story, and there's about 20 or so chapters. I'm going to sort of merge two chapters into one video, but every week I'm going to publish a video on each subsequent chapter. Now, as you can see, there's no author title on here because even though the sort of leader of this team wrote this book, he wanted to be dedicated to the team. It's a team that built this project. It was actually a business. And most importantly, it's a business that failed. This is a story about failure. Many people write stories about their successes and people who succeed. You know, publishing companies want to publish their stories and books about them. So this is quite, it's unique. He's going to explain why they failed, but why this was much, much bigger than a business, and that's why he wrote this book. Now, I've got my notes with me on the right here, so if I look there, I'm not distracted by the neighbor's cat or something like that. And let's see, I think today's video is going to be a little bit longer because I'm going to do the intro as well as chapter one. So, this book is about empowering yourself so that the messages that you perceive on mass information no longer define you, certainly not with the prevalence that they do. Now, in the book, he talks about, I think the statistic he gives, which I think is outdated now, is that we perceive about 5,000 media messages a day. I think the figure nowadays is about 10,000. Now, most of these messages are aimed at getting you to redefine yourself, change your behavior, consumer product, whatever. Right? It's not necessarily bad, but we just need to be aware of what it's doing for us, to us. And today's paradox, and this is the striking theme of this book, it is we are the most informed and most educated generation in all of human history. Yet we are the most rationally compromised. That means we are vulnerable and we no longer have the capacity to think for ourselves because of mass information. And that's a paradox that he gets into this book. Mass information makes us more informed, but it doesn't make us better thinkers. It makes us worse thinkers. So ThinkCitizen is actually an expansion of the company that they founded. It was called ThinkCit, and this was their logo. And in this book, there is a story and the arguments and the implications. And even though the business is now dead, they realize that this is much, much bigger than a business. It is a social issue. And it's more relevant now as we go into the AI age. We've already been part of the mass information age for a while. We're now going into the AI age with all its frightening implications on our happiness. And he just wants people to be happy. In fact, he never justifies why he chose this title, but I can guess that this was originally Socrates' main sort of theme or mission, that a rational society was a happier society, a less divided society. And I think that's why he chose this title, even though he doesn't really mention it. And we can see the implications of poor thinking today, the divisions that we have. Think of any campaign, political, social, whatever, they will use mass information, and they will use techniques in mass information to give moral perceptions of what the good guys are like and what the bad guys are certainly meant to be like. Obviously, he talks about Brexit. That's what stirred this entity into reality. It's now well documented that social media has highly addictive properties. And so we just need to ask ourselves, what do we want? Are we happier for all of this? So anyway, that's the intro. The story. Now, story is in chapter 1. It's a story about a guy who actually wasn't very academic. He spent almost all his teens trying to be a professional footballer, and he wasn't academic minded. He didn't really do very well in school. He only went to university because his parents said it's a good idea. Failed in football. He did a geography degree because that was the only thing I think he was good at. Anyway, it was during his geography undergrad that he discovered philosophy, and he loved it. He didn't know what else to do in life, but he discovered that he loved philosophy. He didn't want to do an undergrad again, so he applied straight to do a master's in philosophy. He loved it so much that he went straight into the PhD program. Now, because he was still new, he wasn't good enough to get funding, and philosophy, as you can imagine, is a very under-resourced sort of, I mean, I know this personally, we just don't get a lot of funding, right? Not the way the engineers and physicists and so on and political scientists get their funding. But it didn't stop him. He did his PhD without funding. He did several part-time jobs for the full duration of his PhD. He just found, it was like he found the love of his life, so to speak. So he does this project, the PhD, he succeeds, he gets his qualification, and then he rears his head up back into the real world after his submission. And there's this thing called Brexit going on. And one thing that jumps out of him is that this is no ordinary political debate. There is a toxicity in the environment that he can't quite put his finger on until he discovers that the reason why he feels it's toxic is because people aren't thinking, right? You're either on this side or you're on that side, and you're not allowed to be in the middle. Now, in philosophy, we are taught to take the middle line and to sway to and fro according to the strength of argument. Now, he had just spent his whole, 5-6 years of his life in this world, where you leave your emotions and your identity and all that sort of stuff at the door while you're reasoning. And he saw very clever, accomplished, educated people not able to reason. So he started giving talks at the university about how to reason properly. Now, remember, this is Bristol. This is a pretty liberal city. It's a university, a very liberal institution. And by the way, he doesn't hide it. He was a Remainer. He wanted Britain to stay in the European Union. But he made a prediction. He said that Leave is going to either come very close to winning or might actually win for one simple reason, which is Remainers have victimized them. Leavers are not going to be allowed to admit that they're leavers. But when they come to vote, you're in this private room, you can do exactly what you want, no one's going to see it, and you can pay lip service to Remain as much as you want so that you're socially accepted, and then vote for Leave. That was his prediction. Eventually, well, we know what happened. Britain voted to leave. And so a few of his students, now even though he continued teaching at the department, PhD students, and even after, they teach undergrads. So that's what he meant by his students. A few of his students went to him and said, right, we were onto something here. We all hated this. This was horrible. And it's not even a question about who was right or wrong. So what are we going to do about it? Do we start a political party? But, what for? We're just a group of philosophers. We don't really take a side. And they said that as philosophers, they are custodians of truth. And one thing that was lacking in the milieu in the air was an absence of truth. And this was part of the debate. People said that media was biased. And so they asked themselves, what is it for media to be biased? Can you put a definition on this thing? What is it for a news article to show or express bias? So they thought about this. Well, certainly he did. And he said, right, let's just go and think about it. And with a bit more time in his hand, he only had teaching commitments and not research commitments anymore. Within a few months, he formulated what is eventually called the ThinkCit validity code. That's what they would later call it, which is basically a derivation of different logics that they know in their discipline of philosophy to get articles to be true to what they're saying. So a sort of truth filter. And he sort of formulated it and systematized it, and he presented it to this group of fellow concerned students. And as soon as he presented it to them, they just said, right, teach us how to do this. This is great. And so I think it was one Saturday morning or something, they got a room, they ordered pizza, and they said, right, we're going to filter news articles. We're going to start with the BBC, then a left-wing, the biggest left-wing news company and the biggest right-wing news company. I think it was The Guardian and The Mail. I think they did CNN and Fox as well. And they filtered, I think it was a group of, he didn't say the number, but I would imagine it was something like 7 or 8 of them. And they filtered hundreds, well, certainly over 100 articles or something like that. And at the end of the day, only 13% of the news articles that they filtered passed the test of validity, according to this code. And that's when they realized that they were onto something. So they were like, well, so this is what it is for the media to be biased. However, and here's the important thing, they were surprised by what they thought was biased and what they thought was truth, and who was more biased and who was not. And I'm going to read you a quote from page 8. And it says, "Then we went to the Daily Mail. Here we expected blatant misguidance and sensationalism. We found the sensationalism, or rather it jumped out at us. But we struggled to prove that it was more misguided than the BBC article. The stories were sensational indeed. Someone getting killed on a holiday, an immigrant doing something nasty, some celebrity doing something unusual. But for the most part, the truths in the article were no less valid than the BBC articles. The claims of the article simply supported the headlines. Yes, even sensational stories could be reported with validity, whilst the BBC article gave less sensational stories but had more invalidity. In other words, the Daily Mail simply published sensational stories, but the journalists did not seem to do more or less than the BBC to reflect the story for what it really was. Therefore, what we call moderate news could simply be characterized as not so interesting news, whereas sensational news was another way of saying that a story was juicier. Both exhibited the same types of misguidance and roughly to the same degree." So this was incredible because they realized that society, we just expected certain institutions to be more truth apt than others. And they said, no, that's not the case. Certainly not when you're testing whether an article is supported by by the text and how quotes are selected. He goes into how the validity code actually works. Anyway, they eventually turned this into some sort of entity. They didn't know what to do or what sort of entity to turn it into. Eventually, they decided on a business. I don't know why. Maybe this might be a bit unkind. Maybe they realize, well, we're not going to make money as philosophers anyway, so you might as well try and make some money, and people are interested in this. I don't know. He later says that it was a big mistake because, one, he was not a businessman, and two, this was not a business. But anyway, he got an investor. It took them a couple of months to develop the news filter platform, and this team, the ThinkCit team, became the people who would filter the news manually. And he got the funding, they were paid. Now, remember, these are These are first, second, third year students, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds who are taking on the BBC almost as adjudicators, right? So it was incredibly empowering for them. And he would go on giving talks about this sort of issue and what ThinkCit was trying to do. Now, he goes on to talk about why the business eventually failed. The first reason it failed was because he tried to do too much. The main reason he tried to do too much is because he realized that this was much bigger than a business. He would give talks at the university, and after every talk, he would get a sort of queue of students wanting to talk to him. But it wasn't about the news. And he gives an example of two students. One student who talked about how she'd basically been very negatively affected by her perception of what a good body image was. And there was another student who went to him in tears, and she complained about the sexual behavior in her relationship with her boyfriend, and that he wanted her to do things that she didn't like, but she knew exactly where he got his ideas from. It was all online, porn or whatever. And then he said, well, I'm just here to teach how to filter a news article. I don't know anything about this. But then his team, being students, said, actually, this is not about, we're not interested in the news. We're interested in social media. So can we find an answer to this? Because this is part of the wider mass information problem. Eventually, he converted the course, the news filter, the ThinkCit validity code, into educational courses. Eventually, they got a contract with the Ministry of Education to deliver these courses to the National Citizenship Service. It's a sort of summer school for college students on identity, on sex and consent. Actually, there was, I think he says at Bristol that time, there was a lot of news on the increasing rate of suicides and sexual assaults and so on. So these courses were meant to get people to change their expectations. He said, you can't just give courses telling people, or accept these people, don't be divisive, or in consent or whatever, say no or yes, whatever. He said it's about what your definition of right and wrong is, who good and bad people are, certainly in politics, in sex, what's your sexual ideal. By the way, that's also a book that's been published, and I'm going to read it. So he did all that. Cut a long story short, 3 years after, he was completely burnt out. The second reason why they failed was because his investor told him that he could not, he needed to use marketing techniques to grow as a business. And remember, this is a news platform, and you're not going to get by selling it to having 1, 2, 3, 10,000 viewers. You need hundreds of thousands of viewers to even get this thing started. And the techniques that they were going to use, this founder couldn't agree with, because it was flying right in the face of what they were trying to do. And he was trying to tell his investor, listen, I've had people come up to me and cry about what advertising makes them feel like, and we've just seen families being split by Brexit. We're starting this for, we want to go against that. And his investor said, use these techniques or you don't have a business. And this guy tried to do things the old-fashioned way, go out and give talks and raise publicity that way, and it failed. Eventually, the business had to shut down. They just weren't making enough money. And this guy was pretty devastated. He was certainly burnt out. And COVID happened, and he changed career, and he started working in the corporate world and so on. Now, the reason he wrote this book was because just because the business shut down didn't mean that the issue had gone away. The team, the ThinkCit team, by the way, they founded the first ever ThinkCit society in the University of Bristol. And, they would give these courses for free, and they just wanted people to talk about the implications of mass information on their lives. And the same sort of society that in the way you'd have religious societies, sports societies, political societies, and so on. Anyway, the people in this team, would go back to him all these years afterwards, and they would say, hey, the problem is getting worse. It's affecting me, it's affecting my friends. Mass information is just, we don't trust it anymore. It's getting out of hand, and we are incredibly vulnerable. We need to restart this thing. And this guy said, no way. And it's not that he doesn't describe it in this way, but I can sort of feel the despair. He just gave up, not just on ThinkCit, but on life, the ability to do good, to make an impact in society. And he just wanted to live his quiet life. But he'd continue his conversations, his relationships, his friendships with these team members. And eventually he said, right, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write our story, and I'm going to write the method. I'm going to simplify it. I'm going to explain it to people. And that's what this book is. So he said, if you think this is an issue, just get people to read this book and make up their own minds. I'm not starting another entity. And that's where the story ends. So next week we will go into chapter 2, which is a bit more about the explanation of why they did what they did. And once again, in the spirit of this, I think I might call myself a ThinkCitizen as well, or a ThinkCit. I don't want to sell you this book. I don't want to persuade you to buy it. I'm just here to explain it. But I'm excited about it. And if you are interested, the link is below. See you next week.